Hey guys, tonight we wander through dimly lit corridors of history, trailing the faint aroma of wine, honey, and burning torches, right into the heart of ancient Greek nightlife. You probably won't survive this without a grin or a raised eyebrow, because these parties were not your average Friday night Netflix binge. Imagine stepping into a room where the chatter echoes like a river of mischief, the laughter rolls like a soft drum, and every corner hums with a tension between intellect and chaos. The Greeks didn't just party, they performed, competed, and sometimes argued philosophy mid-goblet. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I mean it. Seriously. While you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I want to know where in the world you're tuning in from while we tiptoe through ancient revelries. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander into the first room, a symposium chamber, and the walls seem to breathe with whispered promises of wine and scandal. The air is warm, slightly spiced, scented with roasted meats and a touch of something floral, maybe myrrh. Around low couches, men recline, sandals kicked aside, fingers sticky with honey and figs. You notice immediately. This is no polite dinner. The host pours wine with a flourish, swirling it in a shallow bowl called a crater, and the party begins with a toast, which in Greek means more than just a polite cheers. It's a ritual, a challenge, an unspoken dare. Wine in ancient Greece was never simply consumed, it was diluted with water, carefully, to prevent the kind of rowdy chaos you might imagine from a kegger. But don't be fooled. Even watered down, the drinking games were legendary. Scholars still argue whether these games were purely social bonding or a subtle method to measure wit, strength, and cunning. You might glance at a guest flinging a bit of wine across the room, aiming at a target on the wall. It's not just aim. It's katabos, a game that requires both dexterity and, apparently, a good sense of humor. You probably wouldn't survive a round without spilling your drink or cracking a rib from laughing. Curiously, everyone here seems to speak in overlapping layers. A debate about whether the gods approve of their revelry, a joke that toes the line of propriety, a flirtatious glance across the cushions. You realize quickly that ancient Greek parties were social mines where missteps could be humorous or catastrophic. Scholars argue over whether the symposium was more of a leisure space or a subtle exercise in status signaling. You can practically see the hierarchy forming with each goblet passed. The witty, the charming, the brash, and the dangerously clever. Each person's move is a calculated ripple in the room's social tide. Now, imagine you're leaning back on a cushioned couch, the fabric slightly damp from previous wine spills. A servant passes by with a tray of skewered meats and small pastries stuffed with honey. You pick one up, hesitant, and the sweetness overwhelms your senses. In the corner, a guest has already bitten into something that looks suspiciously like a pickled delicacy. You wonder if it's olives or something far more adventurous. Greek cuisine at parties was never bland. It could provoke surprise, delight, or minor panic, depending on your stomach's bravery. Odd details like this pepper the night, and you notice them because you're observant, soaking in every twitch, every gesture. As the night unfolds, music begins. Aulos players start their haunting reed melodies while another guest strums a kithara. The sound fills the room like a river twisting through candlelight. You almost feel the vibrations under your palms as you sit on the low couch, observing the way bodies sway, gestures punctuated by laughter or exclamation. Scholars still debate whether the music was purely entertainment or a sophisticated emotional manipulator, designed to loosen inhibitions and encourage the games you see unfolding. You can't help but lean a little closer, letting the odd rhythms pull you into their spell. And yes, games happen. Katabos, finger flicking, dice tossed with theatrical flourish. It's chaotic, absurd, slightly scandalous, and undeniably fun. A guest misfires, and the wine splashes onto another's tunic. Instead of an argument, laughter erupts. You notice that even small missteps become part of the night's narrative. Each spill, each snicker, each flirtatious glance is a tiny story, woven into the larger tapestry of the party. You realize you're not just observing, you're absorbing a cultural ritual, one that feels at once ancient and strangely familiar, like a dream version of a modern nightclub. Now, if you look a little closer, you notice some guests are quietly engaged in discussion, debating moral dilemmas or philosophical paradoxes. Amid the chaos, reason and intellect sneak in, almost like secret ingredients in a wild stew. Scholars still argue whether these discussions were genuine exercises of thought or just clever posturing for social approval. Either way, you're intrigued, because it's fascinating to see reasoning and revelry coexist in the same space without a single awkward pause. It's a delicate balance, and it makes you appreciate the subtle choreography behind what seems, at first glance, like pure anarchy. And then, there's the flirting. Ah yes, the risque exchanges, the playful teasing, the glances that linger a second too long. You catch yourself smiling, realizing the Greeks had mastered the art of PG-13 innuendo centuries before it became a modern norm. Courtesans and companions navigate the room with effortless grace, slipping between couches, whispering into ears, and leaving trails of curiosity and admiration. Even you, watching from the metaphorical sidelines, feel a tingling sense of amusement. Partying in this world isn't just about drinking, it's a subtle game of charm, wit, and social agility. By now, the room has become a living organism. Wine stains, spilled honey, flickering candlelight, music, laughter, whispers, they all mingle. You notice the host, quietly pleased, orchestrating the chaos like a conductor who's secretly enjoying the cacophony. Scholars still argue whether these gatherings were designed to teach, entertain, or simply affirm social hierarchies, but as you watch, it's clear that they were all three. There's an artistry to the madness, an elegance to the chaos that you can't help but admire. As the night winds down, you lean back, letting your mind drift. The sounds soften, the laughter mellows, and the flickering candles cast lazy shadows on the walls. You notice small details. A wine-stained goblet left behind, the faint scent of burnt honey, the echo of a particularly sharp laugh fading into the distance. You realize that ancient Greek parties weren't just about indulgence. They were sensory experiences, immersive performances, lessons in risk, humor, and social navigation. And somehow, in this slightly tipsy, slightly chaotic atmosphere, you feel more awake than ever. So, as you take this first step into the wild world of Greek nights, remember, you're not just an observer, you're part of the rhythm, part of the laughter, part of the quiet contemplation that happens in the cracks between goblets. And just like the Greeks, you might find that the best stories happen when you're a little tipsy, a little daring, and completely immersed in the moment. You follow the subtle scent of wine deeper into the night, and it leads you straight into the heart of what made Greek parties legendary, drinking like Dionysus himself. The air here hums differently, more intimate, yet charged with energy. You can almost feel the god of wine himself winking from somewhere above, as if daring you to test your limits. And why not? After all, these gatherings weren't casual sips. They were carefully choreographed chaos with rules known only to those bold enough to enter the dance. In this space, wine is ritual. The craters, shallow bowls that hold the communal drink, are passed with deliberate grace, almost like sacred vessels. You notice that each pour is measured, diluted with water in a precise ratio, strong enough to intoxicate, but not so much that the mind becomes a puddle of nonsense too early in the evening. Scholars still argue whether the water-to-wine ratio varied by region or by social status, and you can see why. The ritual is part spectacle, part social experiment. You're intrigued because it's clear that no detail is too small when it comes to Greek drinking culture. You recline on a plush cushion, letting the soft fabric give way under you, and observe the rhythm of the party. The participants don't merely drink, they perform drinking. Cups are raised with dramatic flair, eyes lock across the room, toasts are delivered with wit and a touch of challenge. One guest sloshes a little wine toward the ceiling while aiming at a delicate target, a game you'll come to recognize as a sort of ancient carnival trick. You chuckle, realizing that even centuries ago, humans loved showing off. It's intoxicating in both senses. And the competitions, oh, they are wild. There's a game where guests throw wine from a cup to a target on the floor, called katabos. You probably won't survive a round without embarrassment or laughter, because it's as much about precision as it is about flamboyance. Miss, and your friends cheer or jeer, hit, and there's a moment of triumphant celebration. Oddly, you notice that the competitive element is wrapped in charm, teasing, and social nuance. Scholars still debate whether these games were purely recreational or subtle tests of hand-eye coordination, judgment, and charisma. Either way, you feel a rush of admiration for the inventiveness of it all. As you sip your own metaphorical cup of diluted wine, you notice the people around you. Some lean back, recounting old exploits or poetic verses. Others challenge friends to increasingly absurd dares, like balancing a goblet on a knee while reciting a line of Homer. You marvel at how creativity intertwines seamlessly with indulgence. Modern clubs might boast DJs and neon lights, but the Greeks, they had improvisational theater, wit, and enough daring to keep you teetering between awe and laughter. Now, you might wonder, were the Greeks all men at these gatherings? Mostly, yes, but with exceptions that surprise you. Symposia could include hetairai, courtesans trained in music, conversation, and the arts of flirtation. Their presence wasn't just entertainment, it added complexity to the social interplay. You catch yourself imagining the glances, the subtle teasing, the clever banter bouncing from one person to the next. It's a dance you almost want to join, careful not to spill your cup in the process. Food, of course, accompanies wine. Light, portable snacks, olives, nuts, honey cakes, allow guests to nibble without interrupting the flow of conversation or competition. Oddly enough, the Greeks sometimes flavored wine with herbs or spices, creating combinations that might make your modern palate hesitate. You tentatively taste a sweetened, herb-infused wine and are surprised at how layered the flavors are. Scholars still debate whether these combinations were common or rare indulgences for elite guests. You shrug and decide it doesn't matter, the experience itself is intoxicating enough. You notice the sound of laughter weaving around you like music. Unlike modern parties, where the DJ's beats dominate the senses, here laughter, speech, and the occasional clink of pottery form a living symphony. The participants alternate between hearty roars and whispered secrets. Some guests perform mock philosophical debates mid-sip, challenging friends with riddles or moral conundrums. You lean in, captivated by how intellect and intoxication cohabitate effortlessly. Scholars continue to discuss whether these debates were earnest or playful posturing, but to you, the charm lies in the blur between the two. Occasionally, someone loses their balance or misjudges a throw. A goblet topples, a small splatter of wine arcs across a tunic. You can't help but smile. There's artistry even in the accidents. The Greeks understood that perfection isn't entertaining, messiness is. The room feels alive, unpredictable, and utterly immersive. Every gesture seems charged with possibility, and every misstep becomes another story to whisper about long after the evening ends. You catch sight of a guest swirling wine in their cup, murmuring an indecipherable toast. You realize this isn't just a toast, it's poetry, improvisation, a subtle performance. Music and games might dominate the attention, but these whispered moments of verbal dexterity form an invisible thread throughout the night. Oddly, you find that the subtleties matter as much as the spectacle, a glance, a turn of the head, a smirk. Every tiny action carries weight in this liquid theater. As the night deepens, you notice a subtle shift. Laughter grows softer, games become slower, and conversation drifts into reflection. Wine has loosened tongues, and now minds wander to stories of gods, heroes, and the follies of men. You feel almost voyeuristic, yet completely invited, as if the party itself has extended a warm, intoxicated welcome. Scholars still debate whether symposiums were intended to teach morality or simply revel in indulgence, but standing here, you realize that perhaps the question misses the point. The experience itself is the lesson. And there's always a risk in this world. Too much pride, too much laughter, too careless a movement, and a guest could end the night in mild embarrassment or gentle teasing. It's social navigation at its finest, a subtle game layered over the apparent chaos. You find yourself appreciating the delicate balance. Too strict, and the party dies. Too reckless, and someone ends up crying into their honey cake. The Greeks seem to have found a sweet spot, a perfect blend of order and exuberance. By now, you're not just an observer. You've inhaled the warmth, felt the pulse, and understood a truth modern parties often miss. Drinking is ritual, intoxication is shared, and the joy comes from interplay, creativity, and risk. You realize that Dionysus, if he existed beyond myth, would be proud, not of drunkenness alone, but of the mastery of connection, chaos, and delight that permeates these rooms. So, as you rise from your metaphorical couch, you take one last slow look around. The wine, the games, the laughter, the whispered toasts, all are woven into a tapestry you'll carry with you. You feel slightly dizzy, slightly exhilarated, but entirely alive to the textures, flavors, and moods of Greek revelry. You're hooked, already craving the next chapter, the next absurdity, the next audacious toast. In these halls, drinking isn't merely a pastime, it's a performance, a social experiment, and a vivid dance of humanity. And now, having glimpsed it firsthand, you understand, ancient Greek parties weren't just about wine. They were about life, laughter, and the exhilarating uncertainty of what might happen next. You might not survive the night unscathed, but you will survive enchanted. You're leaning back, still savoring the aftertaste of herb-infused wine, when a tray slides past you, carrying a game that's equal parts ridiculous and mesmerizing, katabos and other wild games. The Greeks didn't just sit around drinking, they competed, performed, and often embarrassed themselves with gleeful abandon. You realize that even centuries later, the idea of people flinging wine at targets while reciting poetry seems absurdly charming. The first game you notice is katabos, a favorite at elite symposia. A guest flicks the dregs of their wine at a small disc or saucer balanced precariously on the floor, aiming to knock it down with precision. You watch the arc of the liquid, it glimmers like liquid rubies in the candlelight. You're tempted to try it yourself, knowing full well that your coordination might be a disaster. Scholars still argue whether katabos was merely entertainment or a subtle test of hand-eye coordination and social cunning. Either way, the laughter that erupts after each successful, or hilariously failed, throw seems essential to the evening's rhythm. Nearby, another game catches your eye. Guests balance shallow cups on their knees while reciting lines from Homer. A misstep sends wine spilling, but the penalty is not shame, it's applause, cheers, and a chance to redeem oneself. You notice that the Greeks treated these competitions almost like theater, a mix of skill, improvisation, and risk, where embarrassment is both inevitable and celebrated. Oddly, you find it strangely relaxing to watch, like a dance you don't have to participate in, though the temptation is irresistible. You lean closer, noticing how the players approach these games with a combination of focus and flamboyance. Each throw, each balance, each calculated flick of the wrist is performative. You realize that the games aren't just silly distractions, they are miniature social laboratories. Scholars debate whether the outcomes influenced status or were simply for amusement, but watching the subtle glances, whispered advice, and playful ribbing, you can see there's an unspoken hierarchy emerging with every round. And the creativity is endless. Some guests invent impromptu challenges, tossing small fruits into goblets, balancing coins on the edge of cups, or daring friends to recite witty epigrams while juggling tiny pastries. You probably wouldn't survive these on your first attempt without spilling or cracking up, but that's part of the fun. It's not about perfection, it's about participation, social dexterity, and laughter. You notice the way spectators lean in, holding their breath in mock tension as a particularly ambitious throw arcs across the room. Music punctuates the chaos. The aulos player nearby changes tempo as the games escalate, and you notice how the rhythm seems to influence each participant's timing. You feel a subtle vibration under your hands, a gentle pulse that threads through the room. The interplay of sound and movement is hypnotic. You almost want to forget the rules and just sway with the crowd. Scholars still argue whether the music dictated the game's pace or merely accompanied them, but you don't need the answer. The experience itself is intoxicating. And then there's the cheeky side. You notice the way some guests deliberately aim their wine at friends' tunics or toes, sparking laughter and mock outrage. It's playful mischief with a social dimension, showing off skill, testing patience, and deepening bonds. Oddly, you feel a pang of envy. The Greeks understood the thrill of mischievous spectacle far better than your modern, risk-averse Friday nights. Each splash of wine is both a joke and a badge of honor. The room is alive with noise and subtle undertones. Laughter, clinking cups, whispered encouragement, and the occasional frustrated groan from a failed throw. You realize that these games are as much about observation as participation. By watching carefully, you notice patterns in skill, preference, and temperament. Who is daring? Who is cautious? Who flinches when a cup teeters? It's a social map painted in splashes of wine and laughter. Sometimes, the games turn unexpectedly theatrical. A guest might recite a tragic line from a play, then aim a perfect throw at the disc, blending drama and skill in a way that makes you pause. Scholars debate whether this theatricality was an intentional element of social education or merely personal flair, but you feel the effect immediately. The room vibrates with both tension and delight. You're drawn in, mesmerized by the layers of human interaction. Food occasionally doubles as a tool for amusement. A curious guest tosses an olive into the air, attempting to catch it in a goblet without breaking the rhythm of a poem. You almost lean forward to offer advice, but the absurdity is part of the magic. Even mistakes are celebrated, becoming stories that will circulate long after the night ends. Oddly, you feel safer laughing at their antics than you do at your own modern missteps. It's a reminder that communal folly has a timeless charm. Flirtation is never far from the games. A wink, a teasing remark, a deliberately wayward throw, these are subtle signals woven into competition. You notice that the Greeks understood the interplay between skill, charm, and humor. A successful throw can impress, but a clever quip delivered mid-failure can win just as many admirers. Scholars still debate whether flirtation was central to the purpose of games or a delightful side effect, but you see clearly that it energizes the room, adds texture, and heightens the stakes. The sensory richness is remarkable. You smell honey cakes, roasted nuts, and faint incense mingling with the sharp tang of spilled wine. You feel the soft cushions under your elbows, the warmth of crowded bodies, and the occasional brush of a hand in animated conversation. Every detail seems choreographed to enhance the night's experience. You probably wouldn't survive this fully alert. Part of the joy comes from surrendering to the flow, letting curiosity and amusement guide you. Games evolve as the night deepens. More elaborate challenges emerge. Balancing cups on tilted surfaces, blindfolded tosses, or improvised team competitions. You watch the interplay of strategy, improvisation, and sheer luck, realizing that these gatherings are a rich tapestry of skill, social dynamics, and joyful chaos. Even when someone fails spectacularly, the response is applause, laughter, or gentle teasing. There's no shame here, only participation, a subtle thrill, and a growing sense of camaraderie. And you, dear listener, become part of it. Even as an observer, your mind tracks trajectories, patterns, and strategies. You anticipate outcomes, cheer silently, and occasionally laugh out loud at the absurdity. You notice the way wine, music, and social daring combine to create a shared experience that feels intimate, yet expansive. Scholars still argue about the function of these games, training, bonding, or mere amusement, but standing here, you realize the distinction is almost irrelevant. The magic is in the living, breathing moment. By the time the games begin to settle, you're aware of an underlying rhythm, playful chaos, punctuated by bursts of brilliance, mingling with flirtation, poetry, and laughter. You feel immersed in an ecosystem where failure is celebrated, daring is admired, and participation itself is an art form. Even the smallest gesture, a spilled goblet, a perfectly aimed toss, a mischievous glance, carries weight. And as you lean back, letting the candlelight dance across your vision, you understand a deeper truth. Greek parties weren't just about drinking or games. They were about living fully in the present, embracing absurdity, and finding joy in skill, wit, and human connection. You feel slightly dizzy, slightly exhilarated, and completely enchanted. The night is far from over, but the first taste of chaos, laughter, and competitive delight has already left an indelible mark. You're hooked. You're ready for whatever wild, playful, and surprising adventures come next, because in ancient Greek revelry, the unexpected is always the best part. You're still buzzing from the games, the laughter, the wild precision of katabos, when a new layer of the night unfolds before you, the erotic edge. Don't panic. It's all PG-13 playful, more about the tease than anything graphic. The Greeks had a knack for flirtation, subtle seduction, and social games that tiptoed on the edge of propriety. You feel like an invisible guest at a masquerade where glances and gestures carry more weight than words. As you lean back into the soft cushions, you notice the hetairai moving among the guests. These women weren't just companions, they were highly trained in conversation, music, and clever humor. They knew exactly how to command attention with a tilt of the head or a perfectly timed comment. You notice a wink here, a teasing remark there, and it's clear that charm and wit were as important as physical presence. Scholars still argue whether hetairai were considered essential participants in the social rituals or mere ornaments, but to you, their effect is undeniable. They bring a playful tension, an undercurrent of mischief, and a sense that anything might happen, without ever crossing a line. A young guest leans forward, daringly close to a friend, whispering a joke about a god's amorous escapades. Laughter ripples softly through the room, but it's more than amusement, it's flirtation wrapped in wit. You notice how carefully glances are exchanged, how subtle touches and words convey layered meanings. In these gatherings, humor and charm were the currencies of social success, often more valuable than a sharp arm or a successful katabo's throw. You can almost feel the pulse of the party, a rhythm driven by intellect, desire, and playful daring. You watch a game that merges flirtation with skill. Two guests, eyes locked, attempt a tricky toss while reciting lines of poetry, their movements teasingly coordinated. Wine splashes, laughter erupts, and the small crowd cheers, not just for the throw, but for the subtle interplay of charm and mischief. You probably wouldn't survive the combination of social pressure, performance, and flirtation without cringing or laughing, but that's exactly the point. It's exhilarating to witness the human spirit dancing on that edge. Food and drink also become instruments of social interplay. A bite of honey cake passed too slowly, a cup offered with a mischievous tilt, or a shared sip of wine can spark subtle sparks between guests. Scholars debate whether these actions were intended to provoke attraction or merely amuse, but you notice a thrill in the ambiguity. Every gesture feels charged, a reminder that in Greek parties, even the smallest movement can carry weight. Music, as always, shapes the mood. The aulos player switches to a slower, almost teasing melody. You notice how bodies shift in response, leaning closer, turning just enough to catch a glance, a finger tracing the edge of a cup. The rhythm is intimate, almost conspiratorial, and you can't help but follow it with your imagination. Oddly, the combination of sound, gesture, and shared laughter feels familiar, like you've stumbled into a timeless dance of connection and allure. The intellectual side of flirtation surfaces, too. Guests exchange clever riddles, subtle insults, or playful moral challenges. A well-timed quip earns more admiration than a skillful throw. You lean in, fascinated by how quickly intellect intertwines with charm. Scholars still debate whether this intellectual flirtation was serious education or merely social play, but to you, it's both. You feel the thrill of cleverness, the pulse of challenge, and the gentle warmth of shared amusement. And then there are the glances. You notice the subtlety, the way a look lingers a second too long, the tilt of a head, a soft laugh meant for a single person. It's all part of the erotic edge without ever becoming explicit. Even as an observer, you feel drawn into the invisible network of social cues, realizing that these nights were as much about psychology as indulgence. You probably wouldn't survive a misread signal without some embarrassment, but observing from your safe spot, you're free to appreciate the elegance of the interplay. The room hums with a kind of tension, not dangerous, but alive. Every gesture, every word, every laugh carries weight. You notice a guest leaning back, eyes sparkling with amusement as they deliver a perfectly timed joke mid-game. The balance of flirtation, humor, and risk creates a rhythm that pulses through the evening, and you find yourself matching it in your imagination, even though you haven't moved an inch. Scholars still argue whether this edge was essential to the symposium's purpose or just an incidental delight, but standing here, you sense that it defines the night. Even the failed attempts are captivating. A misjudged toss, an awkward gesture, or a poorly timed quip doesn't ruin the moment, it enhances it. The audience, small and intimate, responds with laughter, gentle teasing, and encouragement. Oddly, it's comforting to see imperfection celebrated. You realize the Greeks were masters of turning social missteps into shared enjoyment, making every night unpredictable and thrilling. You notice that the erotic edge doesn't exist in isolation, it intertwines seamlessly with games, music, and conversation. The same guest might shift from a flirtatious glance to a clever throw, then to a spontaneous debate, all without breaking the flow. You're captivated by the fluidity. No rigid roles, no dull pauses, only a continuous dance of human connection. Scholars still argue whether this fluidity was intentional or emergent from social norms, but you can't help but admire the elegance of it. Food, as subtle as it is, contributes to the rhythm. Guests nibble honey cakes, olives, and roasted nuts between games and flirtation. A small morsel offered with a tilt of the hand can spark laughter, curiosity, or gentle tension. You notice how these tiny interactions enrich the night, layering humor, charm, and subtle competition. The combination of taste, touch, and play becomes almost hypnotic. You're fully immersed in the sensory and social web. And the room's energy is contagious. Even as a spectator, you feel the pull of the erotic edge, the cleverness, and the playful danger. You lean back, letting yourself absorb the atmosphere, realizing that the Greeks understood human nature better than most modern party planners. Wit, charm, and subtle daring were as intoxicating as wine, and they left a mark that no spilled goblet ever could. By now, you're beginning to see a pattern. Greek parties aren't random chaos. They are carefully choreographed social ecosystems, balancing indulgence, intellect, charm, and daring. You notice how each interaction reinforces the next. A glance leads to a game, a joke leads to flirtation, a misstep leads to laughter. The night moves like a living organism, and you are fully awake to its rhythm. And as you take a deep, slow breath, you notice the gentle fade of candlelight, the soft rustle of tunics, the subtle echo of laughter across cushions. The erotic edge isn't about scandal, it's about presence, subtlety, and connection. You feel slightly dizzy from the energy, slightly warmed by the human interaction, and entirely enchanted. The night is alive with possibility, and you're caught in its pulse, knowing that the next moments will continue to surprise and delight. The erotic games, the subtle challenges, the layered interactions, they're all part of a larger tapestry. You feel as if you could sit here forever, absorbing nuance, listening to whispers, and letting every gesture unfold its story. Scholars still argue about the exact role of flirtation in symposia, but you know the truth, the night would not be complete without it. Every wink, every jest, every playful glance is a thread in the fabric of human joy, daring, and social alchemy. And you, quietly, are part of it. Watching, imagining, laughing softly. You probably wouldn't survive a misstep in this delicate balance, but you can savor it safely from your spot on the cushion, letting the erotic edge guide you gently through the rhythm of the night. You feel alive, alert, and completely enchanted by the interplay of wine, wit, and subtle allure. The night flows like warm honey, and you drift from flirtation and games into the next layer of ancient Greek revelry, music, dance, and sensory intoxication. You probably think you know party music, but imagine a space where the sound isn't just background, it's alive, a pulse threading through every gesture, glance, and sip of wine. You lean back, letting the low cushions cradle you, as the room transforms into something almost ritualistic. An aulos player begins with a slow, teasing melody. The reeds thin, breathy tones curl through the room like smoke, touching every listener with subtle insistence. You feel it vibrate under your palms, almost like the room itself is inhaling and exhaling with the music. A kithara joins in, plucking strings in soft counterpoint. Scholars still argue whether music in symposia was primarily emotional manipulation or simple entertainment, but standing here, you understand instantly, it shapes everything. Your heartbeat even seems to align with the rhythm, drawing you deeper into the shared experience. You notice guests moving subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. A finger taps a cup, a foot sways, shoulders rock slightly. Soon, the movement spreads, a gentle wave of bodies responding instinctively to the music. You can almost feel the collective pulse, a rhythm connecting every participant, every glance, every laugh. Music here is more than ornamentation, It's the thread that stitches chaos, conversation, and competition together. And then dancing begins. Not the wild, frenetic style of modern clubs, but deliberate, graceful, teasing movements. Guests sway in circles, fingers entwined or arms lifted in theatrical flourish. A gentleman performs an exaggerated foot stomp, eliciting laughter, while a hetera glides through the group with elegant precision. You watch, fascinated, noticing how every gesture carries social meaning, admiration, challenge, flirtation, or playful rivalry. Oddly, it feels like an ancient form of storytelling, expressed entirely through rhythm and movement. Food and drink don't pause for music, they become part of the choreography. Wine bowls are tilted just enough to catch reflections of candlelight, honeyed cakes are offered mid-step, and olives are passed like props in a living theater. Scholars debate whether these actions were intentional. Performances are spontaneous indulgences, but the interplay is mesmerizing. You feel caught between observation and participation, as if you could reach out and join without disrupting the delicate balance. Games evolve with music. A guest attempts a particularly tricky Kotabos toss, timing the flick perfectly with a rising note. Another recites an epigram mid-step, balancing a cup on a knee. Each movement, each note, each throw is part of an improvisational tapestry. You probably wouldn't survive without spilling wine or stumbling over your own imagination, but watching is enough to make you dizzy with admiration. And the sensory richness is overwhelming. Candle flames flicker against mosaic walls, the aroma of honey and roasted nuts mingles with the faint scent of incense, and the sound of laughter and music curls around you like smoke. Scholars still debate whether sensory overload was intended or merely incidental, but you feel it acutely, the kind of immersive experience that makes every nerve feel alive. Even a minor detail, a ripple of tunic fabric, the sheen of wine on a cup, a mischievous glance, suddenly feels vital. You notice the subtle coordination between guests. Eye contact signals movement, whispered cues guide steps, and playful nudges direct the flow of games. Even the accidental collisions are part of the rhythm, met with laughter rather than annoyance. The Greeks understood the poetry of chaos, the beauty of unpredictability, and you feel lucky just to witness it. Oddly, the room feels both chaotic and precise at the same time, a paradox that makes your mind spin pleasantly. Flirtation threads through dance seamlessly. A brush of hands, a lingering gaze, a teasing smile, all synchronized to the music. You notice how effortlessly charm, wit, and social dexterity intermingle. Scholars still debate whether these interactions were structured social exercises or spontaneous play, but to you, the lines blur deliciously. You're aware of being drawn into a living performance, one that engages not just sight and sound, but your imagination, your empathy, and even your heartbeat. The progression of energy is subtle but deliberate. The first movements are slow, teasing. Then, as wine loosens inhibitions and laughter softens the edges of decorum, the tempo accelerates. Guests begin inventing their own steps, improvising gestures, blending poetry, music, and movement. Odd little competitions emerge mid-dance. Who can balance a cup while spinning? Who can toss an olive with grace? Who can recite a line perfectly mid-step? You notice how quickly creativity blossoms in this environment, fueled by the mixture of indulgence, skill, and playful daring. Even moments of pause are instructive. A sudden hush falls when a song shifts to a mournful melody. You feel the collective attention tighten, breaths soft, heads tilting, eyes following the subtle cues of performer and audience. Music isn't just background, it commands focus, dictates mood, and enhances every small human interaction. Scholars still argue whether these emotional shifts were intentional or emergent, but you sense they were both, seamlessly orchestrated by a combination of tradition, skill, and improvisation. Odd details continue to fascinate you. You notice a guest balancing a small goblet on their elbow while performing a flourish of the kithara. Another flicks wine at a target, almost synchronized with a rising note. Even minor accidents, spilled wine, tripped foot, are woven into the tapestry with laughter, applause, or gentle teasing. You feel the underlying lesson. Perfection is optional, engagement, joy, and responsiveness are essential. By now, you are fully immersed. You're aware of your own breathing, the soft thrum of music, the gentle warmth of the crowded room, and the shared energy of laughter and games. It's mesmerizing, intoxicating, and slightly dizzying, a sensory and social ecosystem crafted over centuries, refined by tradition and playful daring. Oddly, you realize this is the closest you'll come to understanding how humans have always sought connection, delight, and rhythm together. And you, watching, feel like part of the pulse. Every subtle glance, every flick of wine, every step of dance threads into your imagination. You notice the elegance of movement, the ingenuity of improvisation, and the playful daring that keeps the night alive. Scholars continue to debate whether symposia were designed for entertainment, bonding, or moral instruction, but from your vantage point, it doesn't matter. The experience itself is the lesson. Living fully, engaging fully, and surrendering to the rhythm of the moment. As you let your eyes drift across the room one last time in this segment, you notice the gentle shift in energy. The music softens, movements become more deliberate, and laughter mellows. You feel the cumulative effect of wine, games, flirtation, and dance, a gentle intoxication of senses, social connection, and delight. You lean back, aware of every small detail. The flicker of candlelight, the warmth of another's hand brushing past, the soft hum of music in the background. By the end of this chapter of the night, you realize, Greek parties were not merely indulgence. They were immersive experiences, living tapestries of music, movement, and social interaction. Every gesture, glance, and note was deliberate, playful, and deeply human. And in the midst of it, you feel alive, slightly dizzy, and completely enchanted by the artistry of shared joy. The music fades slightly, leaving behind a warm hum, and you notice the next layer of Greek revelry emerge, philosophical banter and poetic contests. You probably didn't expect this in a night of wine, games, and flirtation, but here it is, intellect as intoxicating as any drink. The room shifts subtly, laughter softens into thoughtful murmurs, eyes brighten with curiosity, and the air carries the faint tension of ideas sparking in real time. A guest leans forward, wine cup in hand, and recites a line from Homer, twisting the meaning in a clever, teasing way. Another challenges them with a question. If Achilles could truly avoid fate, would he still run toward glory? The debate is playful yet charged. You notice how subtle body language punctuates each argument, the tilt of a head, the smirk, the gentle raise of a cup. Scholars still argue whether these symposia aimed at moral education or merely provided entertainment, but standing here, you feel both purposes entwined effortlessly. Poetry contests are next. Guests compete to craft clever epigrams on the spot, responding to each other in a fluid, improvisational dialogue. You watch as lines of wit, satire, and wordplay fly across the room. You probably wouldn't survive without accidentally blurting a laugh at the wrong moment, but that's part of the fun. Each verse is met with cheers, claps, or mock outrage, weaving a tapestry of social play and intellect that makes the night feel alive in ways mere drinking never could. The combination of wine, flirtation, and intellectual performance creates something remarkable. You notice how intoxication subtly loosens inhibitions, allowing guests to take risks with words, gestures, and ideas. Oddly, it's almost like watching improvisational theater, where success is measured not by correctness but by creativity, charm, and timing. Scholars still debate whether drunkenness enhanced or hindered the quality of discourse, but you see clearly that it made the room more electric, more alive, more daring. Games occasionally overlap with debate. A challenge might begin with a thrown goblet or an olive toss and evolve into a witty argument or a spontaneous poem. You lean in, noticing the interplay between physical skill and mental agility. Even the smallest misstep, a spilled drink, a misquoted line, a misplaced flourish, elicits laughter rather than embarrassment. The Greeks seem to understand that the thrill of imperfection often surpasses the comfort of success. You notice the subtle hierarchy emerging. Some guests dominate with cleverness, others with charm, and some with pure audacity. Yet the structure is flexible. Even a newcomer can shine with a well-timed joke or an inspired toss. Scholars still debate whether this social fluidity was intentional or emergent, but you appreciate it as a living ecosystem of human interaction. Every glance, word, and movement carries weight, yet nothing feels rigid or constrained. Food and wine continue to punctuate the evening. Honeyed cakes are nibbled between verses, olives are passed as tokens of appreciation, and diluted wine fuels both courage and eloquence. Oddly, the simplicity of sustenance contrasts with the complexity of the social dynamics. You probably wouldn't survive without spilling crumbs or misjudging a sip, but that's the point. Participation, not perfection, drives the experience. The room occasionally bursts with laughter, triggered by clever insults, playful rivalries, or absurd improvisations. You notice how laughter serves as social glue, smoothing the edges of competitiveness and cementing bonds. Scholars still argue whether humor was central to symposia's educational purpose, but standing here, you understand that it's essential to the human fabric of the night. And then, subtle erotic tension weaves into intellectual games. A well-placed wink or a teasing smile can shift the tone of a debate or poem. You notice the way gestures and glances punctuate arguments, adding layers of meaning beyond words. Oddly, this blending of intellect and flirtation feels entirely natural. You're drawn in, aware of the complexity and elegance of human interaction at its peak. Some guests perform dramatic monologues mid-discussion. You watch one gentleman recite a philosophical observation about courage while gesturing to a spilled goblet, transforming the mishap into metaphor. Another responds with witty counterpoint, using the room's music and laughter as punctuation. Scholars debate whether improvisation was essential to social education, but you notice it as a spectacle, a game, and a lesson all at once. You sense that these discussions, like the games before them, are highly performative. Yet performance here isn't superficial, it's an essential form of communication. You notice subtleties. The rise and fall of the voice, timing of gestures, the tilt of a cup. Every detail enhances meaning. Even a minor misstep, a hesitated line, a fumbled throw, a mistimed laugh, becomes part of the narrative. You feel swept up, fully absorbed in this living, breathing environment of intellect, charm, and social daring. Odd details continue to fascinate. You notice a guest using a dropped olive as a prop to illustrate a philosophical point. Another balances a cup on their knee mid-verse, combining dexterity with verbal agility. You probably wouldn't survive this level of multitasking without flinching, but it's mesmerizing to watch. Scholars still debate whether such antics were common across Greece or localized to elite symposiums, but you can see why these moments are legendary. Music adapts subtly, following the rhythm of debate and verse. The aulos player shifts tone to match the rising tension of argument, the gentle irony of a joke, or the triumphant climax of a clever epigram. You notice how sound enhances comprehension, guiding attention and emotion. Oddly, it feels like the room itself is a living instrument, responding dynamically to every action, word, and glance. By now, the night feels layered with intoxication, play, flirtation, and intellectual engagement. You're aware of every detail. The soft flicker of candlelight, the warm glow of shared glances, the smell of wine and honey, the subtle pulse of music. You probably wouldn't survive this sensory overload fully alert, but your mind, fully immersed, thrives on the interplay. And as the philosophical debates continue, you realize the Greeks understood a truth that modern parties often forget. The thrill of social risk, intellectual engagement, and human play is as intoxicating as any drink. You feel alive, curious, slightly dizzy from a mixture of wine and wonder, and completely absorbed in the evening's intricate rhythm. By the end of this segment, you are aware of a subtle shift. Discussions wind down, laughter softens, and gestures slow into gentle motions. You feel the accumulated warmth of wine, social daring, intellect, and playful risk settle into a comfortable hum. Scholars may still debate the ultimate purpose of symposia, but you don't need an answer. The experience itself, rich, complex, unpredictable, is enough to leave you enchanted. The laughter fades into a warm murmur, and you sense a subtle shift. The night moves toward storytelling and mythic performance. You lean back, feeling the gentle weight of cushions and wine, as a guest begins narrating a tale of gods and heroes. You probably won't survive the grandeur of their imagination without your jaw dropping, but somehow it feels safe to watch from your cozy spot, letting each word weave its magic around you. The story begins with a familiar figure, Dionysus, god of wine, revelry, and mischief. The narrator emphasizes the absurdity of a deity stumbling through mortal follies, a reminder that even divine beings are not immune to chaos. Scholars still argue whether mythic tales in symposia were primarily moral instruction or entertainment, but you feel that in this context, it's both. Every gesture, pause, and intonation draws you into the room's shared imagination. You notice subtle theatrics. A guest mimics a hero's exaggerated posture, flaring their tunic dramatically. Another uses a cup as a prop to represent a weapon, and someone whispers a side comment that sends a ripple of laughter through the audience. Oddly, these small improvisations elevate the story, transforming it from mere recital into a living, breathing performance. You probably wouldn't survive such comedic exaggeration without laughing along, but the warmth of shared amusement makes it irresistible. Poetry and story often intermingle. Guests interject lines of verse that comment, enhance, or humorously critique the unfolding myth. You notice how even minor improvisations, like changing the ending of a tale to surprise listeners, are celebrated rather than scolded. Scholars debate whether this improvisational storytelling was common outside elite gatherings, but right now, it feels like the centerpiece of the evening, a nexus where intellect, play, and narrative converge. Food and wine punctuate each performance. A sip of wine signals a pause, a shared bite of honey cake becomes a dramatic gesture, and spilled olives might be humorously incorporated into the narrative. The Greeks clearly understood that sensory engagement heightens attention and enjoyment. You feel the subtle pleasure of smells, tastes, and textures blending with imagination and performance, creating a multi-layered experience you probably wouldn't survive without being slightly enchanted. Flirtation continues subtly amidst storytelling. A well-timed wink or playful gesture punctuates dramatic tension, drawing glances from friends or rivals. Oddly, these small cues add richness to the tale, as if every social signal amplifies the myth's resonance. Scholars still debate whether flirtation was a secondary element or integral to symposia, but you notice that it enhances both immersion and amusement. The energy of the room is almost tangible. Guests lean forward in anticipation, eyes glinting in candlelight, as the narrative twists unpredictably. You realize that Greek storytelling relies heavily on audience participation. Reactions, laughter, gasps, and interjections all shape the performance. You probably wouldn't survive the subtle pressure to engage without stumbling, but from your quiet vantage point, you can savor the full spectrum of reactions. And then, the stories take an absurd turn. A hero might trip over a grapevine, a god's plan collapses in comedic irony, or a cunning mortal outwits divine authority. Laughter erupts, and the room thrums with shared amusement. You notice that humor is as important as the myth itself, perhaps more so. Scholars argue whether comedy in storytelling was intentional satire or emergent from improvisation, but you feel the joy in every exaggerated flourish. Music adapts again, weaving subtly around narration. The aulos player mirrors tension with minor tones, the kithara provides gentle punctuation, and occasional rhythmic claps from guests underscore dramatic beats. Oddly, the music seems to anticipate your emotions, nudging you toward awe, amusement, or suspense. You probably wouldn't survive the sensory orchestration without feeling slightly dizzy, but it's an exhilarating dizziness, like riding a gentle wave of collective imagination. Guests occasionally compete in micro-performances. Someone improvises a heroic monologue while balancing a cup, another recites a witty epigram mid-story, and someone else tosses an olive to illustrate a dramatic point. Even small mishaps, spilled wine, mispronounced names, flubbed gestures, become part of the narrative, celebrated rather than scorned. You notice how the Greeks blurred the line between story, game, and social theater. Scholars still argue whether performance rules were codified, but in practice, they were fluid, encouraging improvisation and risk. You sense the storytelling becomes a subtle form of social negotiation. Guests observe reactions, adjust delivery, and gauge audience engagement. Flirtation, humor, and intellectual skill are all instruments of subtle influence. Oddly, it feels more exhilarating than any modern social networking event. You notice how every laugh, gasp, or cheer affects status and perception, creating a living feedback loop. You probably wouldn't survive a misjudged joke without embarrassment, but the room's playful energy cushions missteps beautifully. The myths themselves are layered. Some emphasize heroic virtue, others absurdity, and some blur moral lessons with laughter. You notice a tale where a god learns humility in the most ridiculous manner imaginable, slipping on spilled wine while attempting to assert dominance. Scholars debate whether these narratives served as moral guides or entertainment, but you see clearly that both functions coexist. You feel both amused and enlightened, in a state of gentle amazement that doesn't tire you even as the night stretches on. Food, games, music, and myth all converge here. Honey cakes are offered mid-story, wine cups punctuate dramatic pauses, and music underscores the narrative's rhythm. Guests' glances, gestures, and interjections punctuate the myth-like commentary. Oddly, this integration of senses, intellect, and social play feels far more immersive than any modern storytelling night. You probably wouldn't survive such constant stimulation without feeling overwhelmed, but instead, you feel enraptured, letting each element feed into your imagination. The night deepens, and stories take on subtle erotic undertones. A hero's misstep might evoke laughter and gentle flirtation, a goddess's trickery draws winks and amused murmurs. Scholars still debate the role of eroticism in symposia storytelling, but you notice that it's playful, subtle, and deeply human, weaving tension and delight without ever becoming overt. You feel the intimacy of shared amusement, the thrill of wit, and the gentle warmth of participation. By the end of this segment, you notice a lull settling over the room. Music softens, laughter mellows, and guests recline comfortably, satisfied with the narrative performances. Yet the air remains charged with subtle excitement, the sense that anything could emerge next, from clever epigrams to daring gestures. Scholars may continue to debate symposia's ultimate purpose, but you don't need to know. The experience itself, a seamless blend of myth, humor, flirtation, and sensory delight, leaves you entranced and fully immersed in the pulse of the night. The soft hum of laughter and music lingers as the evening shifts toward drinking rituals and subtle competitions. You probably think you know what a drinking game is, but the Greeks play with far more nuance than tossing back shots or clinking glasses. You feel yourself drawn into a complex ballet of skill, wit, and endurance, all under the guise of simple indulgence. A guest raises their cup with deliberate ceremony. The wine is diluted, golden red in the flickering candlelight, swirling with the soft sheen of olive oil residue from the meal. You notice how carefully the act of drinking is choreographed. Scholars still argue whether the purpose was to test endurance, courage, or social cunning, but from where you sit, it looks like a sophisticated game of timing, observation, and subtle bravado. The first game begins. It's called katabos, a test of precision where wine is flung from a shallow cup toward a target, usually a small disc balanced precariously. You probably wouldn't survive the tension if you were participating. One wrong flick could splash wine, ruin your reputation, or spark laughter at your expense, but watching is almost hypnotic. Guests lean, twist, and pivot with surprising elegance, turning the simple act of tossing wine into a small performance. You notice the oddities immediately. Some players recite poetry mid-throw, weaving words into motion, while others hum tunes or wink at nearby companions. Oddly, these layers of distraction are celebrated. Scholars debate whether these flourishes were ritualistic or spontaneous, but their effect is undeniable. Each throw is both a challenge and entertainment, combining dexterity, intellect, and subtle flirtation. Wine continues to flow, and the rules of social interaction remain fluid. A misjudged toss is met with laughter, playful teasing, or gentle advice. You feel the delicate balance. The night rewards risk but cushions failure. The Greeks seem to understand that the thrill of competition is inseparable from the potential for embarrassment. You probably wouldn't survive without blushing or giggling in such a setting, but from your seat, the interplay is irresistible. Games evolve spontaneously. A guest might propose a contest of storytelling while maintaining perfect katabos accuracy. Another challenge is a friend to mimic a heroic pose mid-throw, wine sloshing perilously. Oddly, this blend of physical skill, improvisation, and social cunning feels entirely natural. Scholars still argue whether these overlapping competitions were common or elite-specific, but the spectacle captivates you. Food, of course, is never far. Small bites of roasted nuts, honey cakes, and olives punctuate each throw. You notice how gestures, offering a morsel, passing a cup, or balancing a plate, become part of the performance, adding humor, risk, and intimacy. Even minor accidents, a dropped olive, spilled honey, or slightly tilted cup, are integrated into the night with laughter and gentle teasing. You probably wouldn't survive without some nervous anticipation, but it enhances the charm. Music adapts yet again. The aulos shifts tone with the rhythm of competition, providing subtle cues for timing and tension. The kithara punctuates throws with dramatic plucks, highlighting successes or failures. Oddly, the music feels responsive, like a live participant, guiding emotion and attention. Scholars debate whether musicians improvised consciously or followed cues, but you're too enchanted to care. You notice subtle hierarchy in participation. Some guests dominate through skill, others through creativity, others through sheer audacity. Yet the system is fluid. Even a newcomer can shine with clever improvisation or audacious risk. Scholars still argue whether this fluidity was intentional, but you feel the thrill of possibility. Anyone can surprise, impress, or amuse at any moment. Flirtation continues to weave through competitions. A well-timed glance, a teasing smirk, or an exaggerated flourish adds stakes beyond the game itself. Oddly, these playful cues intensify engagement, merging skill, charm, and social insight. You probably wouldn't survive without some blush or laugh, but observing the dance of intellect, dexterity, and subtle allure is mesmerizing. Even rules are sometimes flexible. A particularly daring participant might declare a new variant mid-game, and the others adapt immediately, laughing or groaning in mock protest. You notice how innovation and improvisation are celebrated rather than penalized. Scholars still debate whether rule fluidity was formalized or emergent, but it's clear the Greeks valued creativity alongside skill. The rhythm of competition carries a hypnotic quality. Each throw, each gesture, each glance unfolds with timing that feels almost ritualistic. You feel the collective pulse, aware of how wine, skill, humor, and flirtation merge seamlessly. Oddly, it reminds you of watching an orchestra where every participant is both musician and audience. You probably wouldn't survive without feeling slightly dizzy from anticipation, but it's a pleasurable dizziness, like riding the crest of a gentle wave. Even failures become part of the spectacle. A poorly aimed toss, a spilled drink, a missed cue, each evokes laughter, applause, or gentle teasing. You notice that imperfection isn't just tolerated, it's celebrated. The Greeks understood that the thrill of play emerges from risk, uncertainty, and creativity. Scholars still debate whether this philosophy extended beyond symposia, but in practice, it animates the night, transforming simple drinking into a vibrant social and sensory experience. By now, you're completely absorbed. Wine, music, flirtation, games, and improvisation intertwine seamlessly. You notice the flicker of candlelight on faces, the subtle scent of honey and roasted nuts, the soft cadence of laughter punctuating every gesture. You probably wouldn't survive without feeling slightly overwhelmed, but the richness of the experience keeps you enchanted, fully attuned to every small moment. The night deepens into a rhythm of intoxicating sensory and social interplay. Each throw, gesture, glance, and word becomes part of a larger narrative, a tapestry of connection, skill, and delight. Scholars may continue to debate the exact purpose of these rituals, but you understand it intuitively. These games, layered with wit, music, and flirtation, are not mere diversion. They are living, breathing expressions of human creativity, courage, and play. And as the echoes of clinking cups and laughter settle into a warm hum, you feel the subtle satisfaction of having witnessed something extraordinary. You lean back, eyes half closed, senses alive with the mingling aromas, sounds, and gestures, feeling fully immersed in the elegance, chaos, and joy of the night. The clinking of cups and soft hum of music fade into the background, leaving you suspended in a quieter, more intimate rhythm. You feel the room shift toward intimate storytelling and playful seduction, the subtler, almost whispered side of Greek symposia. You probably won't survive this level of delicate tension without blushing, but from your spot on the cushions, you can savor every nuance without risk. A hetera leans forward, her voice low, weaving a story about a mortal who dared to flirt with the gods. The tale blends wit, innuendo, and charm, each line punctuated by a teasing glance or a half smile. Scholars still argue whether erotic storytelling was instructional, playful, or both, but you feel its power immediately. Every word, every gesture, is calibrated to enthrall, amuse, and subtly entice. You notice the subtle choreography of flirtation. A finger brushes the rim of a wine cup, eyes meet with careful timing, laughter punctuates clever lines. Oddly, these cues operate like a secret language. The slightest miscue could spark amusement or gentle rebuke. You probably wouldn't survive without mimicking a blush or stifled laugh, but observing the delicate interplay is thrilling. Small games emerge within the intimacy. Guests might challenge each other to improvise a witty compliment mid-story, or to craft a risque line that remains clever rather than crude. You notice how skill, charm, and timing intertwine, producing a dance as intricate as the previous musical and physical competitions. Scholars debate whether these micro-contests were formalized, but in practice, they feel spontaneous, alive, and perfectly tuned to social rhythm. Music adapts with subtlety. The aulos player leans into minor tones, coaxing tension and anticipation, while the kithara plucks gentle, teasing patterns. The sound almost whispers along with the conversation, enhancing emotion and focus. Oddly, it feels like the room itself conspires to amplify subtle connections, nudging reactions and heightening suspense. You probably wouldn't survive the cumulative effect without feeling slightly breathless, but it's deliciously immersive. Food punctuates intimacy as well. Honeyed cakes, olives, and nuts are offered or shared, often accompanied by a playful gesture or a teasing comment. Even accidental spills, wine, crumbs, or honey, become opportunities for laughter and connection. Scholars still debate whether these sensory interactions were central or incidental, but you notice how they heighten engagement and subtle tension. Flirtation merges with intellectual play. A guest might challenge another to craft an improvised epigram that balances wit, charm, and subtle allure. The result is a delicate negotiation of humor, intellect, and sensuality. Oddly, you realize that what looks like casual banter is actually a finely tuned dance of observation, timing, and improvisation. You probably wouldn't survive without catching some of the subtle social cues, but your imagination fills in the rest, heightening the thrill. The layering of performance is fascinating. A story might include a micro gesture, a raised eyebrow, a lingering smile, a deliberate pause, that signals amusement, challenge, or desire. Another guest reacts with clever timing, flipping the dynamic in a playful contest of subtlety. Scholars still argue about the role of nonverbal communication in symposia, but here it feels essential, a silent language intertwined with narrative and music. Games occasionally overlap with seduction. A tossed olive or perfectly timed cup flick might serve as both a playful challenge and a flirtatious overture. You notice how clever improvisation can bridge physical skill and social cunning, blending entertainment and desire. Oddly, the subtlety makes it more engaging than overt gestures ever could. You probably wouldn't survive without catching some of the cues, but observing is almost as thrilling as participating. The room itself seems alive with energy. Candlelight flickers across faces, eyes glint with shared amusement, and whispers thread through the gentle murmur of conversation. You notice how intimacy and attention magnify even the smallest gestures, a touch on a shoulder, a whispered joke, a subtle glance. Scholars debate whether this heightened awareness was a social strategy or emergent phenomenon, but you feel its effect in your chest, a warm pulse of human connection. Even missteps are woven into the narrative. A clumsy gesture or misaligned joke elicits laughter, gentle teasing, or exaggerated mimicry. You realize the Greeks understood the charm of imperfection. It creates humor, intimacy, and opportunity. Oddly, these failures often strengthen social bonds, reminding you that risk and vulnerability are part of play. You probably wouldn't survive without noticing a twinge of empathy or amusement, but it enhances your immersion. You observe a particularly daring improvisation. A guest integrates a minor physical accident, a tripped foot, a tipped cup, into a clever, flirtatious anecdote mid-story. Laughter erupts, and the audience leans in closer, captivated. Scholars still debate whether improvisation was expected or exceptional, but from your vantage, it feels like the heartbeat of the night. Music shifts again, softer now, coaxing the audience into a hypnotic intimacy. The room hums gently, a combination of murmured responses, shared laughter, and attentive listening. Oddly, the collective quietness amplifies the tension, making every word, glance, and gesture resonate more than before. You probably wouldn't survive this subtle orchestration without feeling slightly dizzy, but the sensation is pleasurable, almost meditative. By the end of this segment, you notice a delicate calm settling over the gathering. Wine bowls are lowered, stories are punctuated with soft laughter, and guests recline comfortably, their attention shifting from performance to shared presence. Scholars may debate the ultimate purpose of seduction and intimacy in symposia, but you intuitively understand. These moments deepen connection, sharpen wit, and enrich the playful dance of social interaction. You lean back, absorbing the gentle warmth of candlelight, the faint scent of honey and wine, and the soft hum of collective breath. You probably wouldn't survive this level of sensory and social immersion fully alert, but you feel enveloped in a cocoon of human ingenuity, charm, and subtle delight, ready for the next layer of the night's adventure. The murmurs of intimate storytelling fade, replaced by a gentle swell of music and laughter, signaling a shift toward physical performances and playful spectacles. You probably won't survive the sheer audacity of some of these displays without gasping or grinning, but from your plush perch, you have the perfect vantage point. A guest rises, balancing a wine cup in one hand and a thin staff in the other, preparing for a display of agility and dexterity. The performance isn't purely athletic, it's choreographed, theatrical, and mischievous, blending skill with showmanship. Scholars still argue whether such displays were primarily entertainment or a subtle form of social hierarchy, but you're too mesmerized to care. Every motion, tilt, and gesture draws your attention. Wine continues to punctuate performances. Small sips signal transitions or dramatic pauses, while the occasional spill is seamlessly incorporated into the spectacle. Oddly, imperfection is celebrated rather than scorned, turning potential mistakes into sources of humor and communal engagement. You probably wouldn't survive without flinching at a near miss, but it adds suspense and delight. Guests rotate through displays. One performs acrobatics while reciting a playful poem, another juggles olives or small goblets with absurd flair. The room hums with admiration and laughter, punctuated by the soft plucks of a kithara and the airy wail of an aulos. Oddly, the combination of physical skill, music, and improvisation makes the room feel alive in ways you didn't expect. Scholars still debate whether acrobatics were standard at symposia, but the audience seems wholly captivated. You notice subtle competitions emerging. Who can balance a cup the longest while telling a story? Who can perform a clever gesture mid-throw without losing rhythm? These contests blur the lines between skill, performance, and social play. Oddly, you realize that mastery here is measured less by technical perfection and more by charm, creativity, and timing. You probably wouldn't survive without feeling a twinge of admiration, or envy, but the spectacle keeps you riveted. Flirtation threads through physical performances. A wink, a teasing smile, or a deliberately exaggerated fall draws attention, laughter, and subtle social negotiation. You notice how performers manipulate both skill and charisma, turning displays into multi-layered interactions. Scholars still argue whether these cues were intentional or emergent, but you feel their effect intuitively, a gentle hum of tension and delight. The music adapts dynamically. The aulos heightens suspense during a particularly daring juggling act, then softens into gentle tones as performers bow or pause. Oddly, the room's energy feels almost symphonic, with every laugh, cheer, and gasped reaction acting like an instrument in a grand composition. You probably wouldn't survive without noticing the subtle orchestration, but it heightens your immersion and sense of wonder. Food is integrated creatively. Honey cakes, nuts, and olives are used as props, either tossed into small targets or incorporated into comedic displays. A fumbled olive might inspire a poetic quip, a playful tease, or a dramatic pause. You notice how improvisation transforms ordinary sustenance into a narrative device, bridging performance, humor, and social engagement. Scholars still debate whether this was common across Greece, but tonight it seems entirely natural. Even failures are celebrated. A misstep in balance, a dropped cup, or a mistimed flourish triggers laughter, applause, or exaggerated mimicry. You notice the subtle social dynamic. Success is admired, but risk and creativity are equally rewarded. Oddly, this philosophy creates an atmosphere where experimentation and playful audacity thrive. You probably wouldn't survive without feeling a flutter of suspense at each attempt, but it makes the spectacle irresistible. You watch as gestures, glances, and words synchronize with physical displays. A performer's tilt of the head, a flick of the wrist, or a teasing comment adds layers of meaning beyond the act itself. Scholars still debate whether nonverbal cues were codified or improvised, but you notice their impact instantly, enriching the sensory tapestry of the evening. Some guests combine multiple skills: juggling, reciting poetry, and improvising witty commentary simultaneously. The complexity is dizzying, the dexterity impressive, the charm undeniable. Oddly, you realize the Greeks reveled in such layered performances because they combined intellect, humor, and daring, showing that mastery is as much social as physical. You probably wouldn't survive without feeling slightly overwhelmed, but your mind delights in the intricate choreography. Laughter and applause ebb and flow, punctuating moments of suspense, clever improvisation, and audacious stunts. The interplay between spectators and performers creates a feedback loop. Daring acts invite more risk, clever gestures spark more wit, and every reaction shapes the unfolding spectacle. Scholars still debate whether audience participation was central, but here, it feels indispensable. By now, the room thrums with a subtle, intoxicating energy. Music, performance, flirtation, and playful competition blend seamlessly, creating a vibrant, multi-sensory environment. You feel immersed, aware of every glance, gesture, and sound. Oddly, it feels like being part of a living organism, where each participant contributes to the pulse of the night. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally holding your breath, but it's exhilarating, hypnotic, and utterly enchanting. As the evening progresses, performances gradually slow. Movements become more relaxed, music softens, and laughter mellows into gentle murmurs. You notice the subtle transition. Energy remains, but it's tempered by shared comfort, satisfaction, and the warmth of social bonds. Scholars may debate the function of spectacle in symposia, but you know it has achieved its purpose: delight, connection, and a shared celebration of skill, wit, and audacity. You lean back, savoring the gentle glow of candlelight, the mingling aromas of wine and honey, and the soft resonance of fading music. You probably wouldn't survive fully alert without feeling a touch of exhaustion, but it's the good kind. A warm, satisfied awareness that you've witnessed something extraordinary, a playful, intoxicating, and deeply human experience. The room's energy has settled into a more reflective rhythm, and you notice the evening shifting toward intellectual games and subtle challenges of wit. You probably won't survive without being slightly dazzled by the cleverness on display, but from your perch among cushions and half-empty wine cups, you're perfectly positioned to soak it all in. A guest proposes a riddle contest, and the murmurs ripple through the room. Each participant takes turns offering brain teasers, often layered with wordplay, mythological references, and subtle innuendo. Oddly, the puzzles aren't just about cleverness, they're social tools, invitations to engage, respond, and display charm. Scholars still argue whether riddling was purely entertainment or a way to gauge intellect and social cunning, but right now, it feels like both. You watch a particularly elaborate challenge unfold. One guest presents a riddle referencing a minor deity's obscure misadventure, and another responds with an improvised verse that not only solves the riddle but cleverly twists it into a humorous observation about a fellow guest. The audience erupts with laughter and applause. You probably wouldn't survive participating without tripping over your own words, but observing is mesmerizing, a blend of intellect, humor, and performance. Games often overlap. A riddle might segue into a mini-poetic duel or a light-hearted argument about the moral of a myth. Music provides subtle punctuation. The aulos shifts tone during tension, the kithara plucks gentle highlights, and murmurs of approval or playful protest add to the rhythm. Oddly, you notice that every element, sound, gesture, word, feeds back into the social dynamics of the evening. Scholars still debate whether this interplay was intentional, but it's clearly effective in keeping engagement high. Flirtation threads through these intellectual contests. A clever answer might be accompanied by a wink, a teasing smile, or an exaggerated bow. You notice how participants balance charm, intelligence, and playful competitiveness, creating subtle layers of tension and delight. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally catching a flustered glance, but it heightens the immersive thrill of the night. Wine continues to lubricate both social and intellectual daring. A sip can signal confidence, a pause, or a challenge, while small spills are humorously incorporated into the ongoing games. You notice how the Greeks understood that the ritual of drinking isn't just indulgence, it's a tool for timing, social nuance, and engagement. Oddly, the simple act of lifting a cup can carry layers of meaning you'd miss without paying careful attention. Small improvisational moments abound. A guest might intentionally misinterpret a riddle, sparking a quick exchange of wit, or turn a near failure into clever satire. Scholars still argue whether improvisation was formalized or spontaneous, but you can see clearly that it's central to the evening's energy. Every joke, twist, and playful misstep reinforces bonds and keeps the atmosphere vibrant. You observe subtle hierarchy in these contests. Some guests dominate through sharp intellect, others through humor, and others through audacious risk-taking. Yet the structure remains fluid. Anyone can shine if timing, creativity, and charm align. Oddly, the Greeks seem to value audacity as much as accuracy, reminding you that social engagement rewards courage as much as knowledge. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally wincing at someone's clever jab, but it's all part of the thrill. The stories, riddles, and micro-games intertwine with sensory experience. The scent of honeyed cakes, the warmth of wine, and the flicker of candlelight punctuate every line, glance, and response. You notice how physical and intellectual stimulation feed each other, creating a subtle, immersive flow. Scholars still debate whether sensory cues were deliberate tools, but they undeniably heighten engagement. Even playful teasing carries stakes. A poorly timed joke or a missed clever response invites gentle mockery, sometimes escalating into mini challenges or repartee duels. You notice the way humor softens tension while reinforcing social bonds. Oddly, the Greeks seem to understand that wit is both weapon and lubricant in human interaction. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally wincing at a cutting comment, but laughter always follows, restoring equilibrium. Music punctuates suspense in unexpected ways. A minor chord hints at a challenge, a sudden flourish accentuates a witty retort, and a quiet rhythm underscores tension before resolution. You notice how participants subconsciously respond to these cues, timing gestures, words, and glances to maximize impact. Scholars still argue whether this was intentional or emergent, but from your perspective, it's mesmerizingly effective. The night deepens, and the intellectual games begin to merge with physicality. A clever verse might require gestural emphasis, or a playful dare might accompany a riddle's answer. Oddly, you realize that the Greeks blurred categories deliberately. Skill, wit, charm, and courage all intersect seamlessly. You probably wouldn't survive participating fully without floundering, but as an observer, the complexity is delightful. By the end of this segment, the room hums with quiet satisfaction. Laughter softens, contests taper off, and participants recline with a sense of accomplishment and camaraderie. Scholars may debate the ultimate function of riddles and micro-challenges, but you intuitively understand. They are a celebration of human intellect, audacity, and playful social connection. You lean back into cushions, feeling the lingering warmth of wine, candlelight, and shared amusement. You probably wouldn't survive without a slight ache from laughing too much, but it's a good ache, a reminder that you've fully immersed yourself in the subtle brilliance of the evening. The interplay of wit, charm, and gentle competition leaves you both alert and deeply satisfied, ready for the next layer of the night's adventures. The laughter and soft music ebb into a gentler rhythm, drawing the evening toward sensory indulgence and subtle intoxication. You probably won't survive the layered pleasures of taste, touch, and smell without your senses feeling delightfully overwhelmed, but reclining here, you're in the perfect spot to savor every nuance. A guest offers a small plate of sweet cakes drizzled with honey and sprinkled with crushed nuts. The scent alone makes your mouth water, a warm, heady aroma mingling with the lingering fragrance of wine and candle smoke. Oddly, the Greeks seem to understand that scent can amplify social and narrative experience, turning simple indulgence into an almost ritualistic pleasure. Scholars still debate whether sensory stimulation was a primary intention, but you feel its effect instantly. You pick up a morsel and bite, the crunch of nuts followed by honey's slow sweetness. Music softly punctuates the moment. The aulos player shifts to minor tones, drawing attention to subtleties you might otherwise miss. You probably wouldn't survive this focused awareness without savoring the experience fully, but the layering of taste, sound, and anticipation is intoxicating in itself. Wine flows gently, each sip a subtle measure of indulgence and social harmony. A guest might raise a cup with an exaggerated flourish, prompting a ripple of cheers or playful mockery. Oddly, even the act of drinking becomes a performance, an opportunity to display grace, timing, or humor. Scholars still argue whether the ritual of wine was primarily social, sensory, or symbolic, but from your vantage, it feels like all three at once. Guests explore texture as well. Olive oil is brushed across bread, honey thickly drizzled, and small fruits passed hand to hand. Oddly, these tactile pleasures intertwine with conversation, storytelling, and flirtation. You notice how a simple gesture, offering a morsel, passing a cup, becomes laden with subtle meaning, turning sustenance into a tool for connection and playful intrigue. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally laughing or blushing, but it adds an intimate rhythm to the evening. Music becomes softer, more intimate. The kithara plucks gentle harmonies, the aulos hovers in quiet suspense, and the room seems to hum in response. Oddly, you realize the soundscape is almost hypnotic, guiding mood and attention even as conversation continues. Scholars still debate whether musicians followed rigid cues or improvised fluidly, but the effect on the senses is undeniable. Flirtation flows through these sensory rituals. A teasing glance while passing a cup, a playful brush of fingers over a shared plate, a wittily timed comment, they all create a subtle tension that heightens engagement. You notice how carefully participants navigate these cues, blending charm, humor, and risk. Oddly, the effect is intoxicating without being overt. You probably wouldn't survive without blushing, but observing the delicate dance is exhilarating. Games of perception and memory occasionally emerge. A guest might hide an olive or small token, challenging another to locate it with a clever twist or verse. Oddly, even minor competitions are elevated by subtle sensory cues, the weight of a cup, the flicker of candlelight, or the hum of laughter. Scholars debate whether such micro-games were standard, but they undeniably enhance engagement and delight. Storytelling continues alongside sensory indulgence. Tales are whispered, punctuated by sips of wine or the passing of food. Oddly, the convergence of narrative, touch, taste, and aroma deepens immersion. You probably wouldn't survive without feeling slightly overwhelmed, but it's a pleasurable, almost meditative overload of senses and imagination. Even mishaps, spilled wine, dropped crumbs, or misheard lines, become part of the evening's charm. Guests improvise responses, weaving accidents into jokes, short verses, or playful taunts. Oddly, imperfection is celebrated, enriching connection and humor. Scholars still debate whether this flexibility was intentional, but it's clearly central to the symposia experience. You notice the subtle orchestration of timing. Sips, bites, gestures, laughter, and whispers follow an invisible rhythm, a choreography of pleasure and social engagement. Oddly, it feels almost like a slow dance, a sensual ballet where every participant plays both performer and observer. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally pausing to absorb the moment, but the effect is hypnotic. By the end of this segment, the room is filled with a warm, shared glow. Music softens, laughter mellows, and gestures become languid, unhurried, and intimate. Scholars may debate the purpose of sensory indulgence, but you understand its effect: heightened connection, playful engagement, and shared delight. You lean back into the cushions, savoring the lingering scents, the subtle warmth of wine, and the gentle hum of conversation. You probably wouldn't survive fully alert without a hint of drowsy pleasure, but it's a welcome sensation, a gentle immersion in indulgence, humor, and the soft intimacy of human interaction. The candles flicker lower, shadows stretching across the room, as the night drifts toward philosophical musings and moral debates. You probably won't survive the subtle tension of intellect and wit without feeling a thrill of anticipation, but from your cushion, you are perfectly placed to witness the unfolding drama. A guest leans forward, voice calm but resonant, posing a question about justice, friendship, or the nature of desire. The room leans in collectively, the hum of conversation dropping as participants weigh words carefully. Oddly, even these weighty topics are filtered through humor, clever analogy, or playful exaggeration. Scholars still argue whether symposia were primarily social or philosophical, but tonight, they are indisputably both. You notice how discussion flows naturally between serious thought and playful banter. A point about morality might segue into a story about a mischievous god or a clever mortal, eliciting laughter, applause, and subtle nods of approval. Oddly, the Greeks seem to understand that ideas are best explored with both intellect and charm. You probably wouldn't survive participating without stuttering or overthinking, but observing the interplay is utterly engaging. Music provides a soft underscore. The kithara plucks thoughtful patterns, while the aulos breathes a gentle, questioning tone. Oddly, the instruments mirror the ebb and flow of debate, punctuating points with subtle cues or teasing emphasis. Scholars still debate whether this was intentional, but from your seat, the effect is hypnotic, drawing you deeper into the discussion. Wine lubricates intellect as much as social interaction. Each sip is carefully timed, signaling agreement, emphasis, or playful challenge. Oddly, even drinking becomes a rhetorical device, punctuating arguments with a sensory flourish. You probably wouldn't survive without feeling slightly dizzy, but the layering of flavor, thought, and gesture heightens the experience. Guests engage in clever analogies and layered reasoning. One compares the loyalty of a friend to the unpredictability of the sea, another counters with a quip about the gods' own flawed friendships. Laughter and applause follow, blending seamlessly with serious reflection. Oddly, humor and intellect are inseparable, each enhancing the other. Scholars still argue whether such blending was expected, but the effect is undeniable. It captivates, challenges, and entertains simultaneously. Flirtation continues in subtle forms. A well-timed gaze, a teasing smile, or a playful nudge punctuates philosophical points. You notice how participants balance intellect, charm, and social acuity, creating a dance of attention, wit, and subtle provocation. Oddly, it feels less like seduction and more like a sophisticated game, where understanding and perception are as seductive as physical allure. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally blushing, but observing is exhilarating. Games of moral reasoning sometimes emerge. A hypothetical dilemma, should one steal to save a friend, sparks debate, storytelling, and improvisational examples. Oddly, these intellectual contests carry emotional stakes. Laughter, mock outrage, and dramatic gestures punctuate each argument. Scholars still debate whether moral debate was primarily for amusement or instruction, but tonight it feels alive, playful, and socially binding. You notice subtle hierarchy in participation. Some guests dominate with eloquence, others with clever humor, others with daring paradoxes. Yet anyone can shine if timing, creativity, and charm align. Oddly, the Greeks valued audacity and risk-taking in intellect as much as in physical or social play. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally wincing at a particularly sharp argument, but it heightens the thrill of engagement. Storytelling blends seamlessly with debate. A guest recounts a mythological tale, then twists the moral to spark discussion. Another interrupts with a humorous aside, a clever observation, or a playful challenge. Oddly, the improvisation feels guided by subtle social rules, where wit, observation, and timing are as important as the content itself. Scholars still argue whether spontaneity or structure dominated, but from your perspective, the improvisation is mesmerizing. Even small missteps are woven into the evening. A poorly phrased argument or misquoted line elicits laughter, gentle correction, or playful mimicry. Oddly, these minor errors reinforce bonds, encourage participation, and maintain a lively atmosphere. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally cringing, but the overall effect is charming, human, and relatable. The room's energy fluctuates between intensity and relaxation. Sharp debates give way to softer, reflective commentary, laughter punctuates profound points, and music, food, and wine provide a gentle backdrop. Oddly, you realize this delicate balance is central to the symposia experience. Intellect, pleasure, and human connection are inseparable. Scholars still debate the precise function of such evenings, but you understand it intuitively. They are living laboratories of wit, philosophy, and social dexterity. By the end of this segment, the atmosphere has deepened. Conversations linger in thoughtful murmurs, eyes gleam with amusement, and the warmth of shared reflection permeates the room. You lean back into cushions, wine glass in hand, absorbing the interwoven threads of intellect, humor, and subtle performance. You probably wouldn't survive fully alert, but it's a satisfying, slightly dizzying immersion into human ingenuity and playfulness. The room's glow has softened even further, candlelight flickering low, as the night drifts toward mystical stories and subtle rituals. You probably won't survive the spine-tingling intrigue of whispered secrets without shivering or chuckling, but here on your cushion, you are perfectly positioned to soak it all in. A guest leans forward, voice low, recounting a tale of gods, minor spirits, and mortals whose audacity or folly drew divine attention. Oddly, even the most fantastical elements carry a subtle social lesson, layered with humor and gentle exaggeration. Scholars still debate whether ritual storytelling was meant to instruct, entertain, or subtly manipulate social norms, but the effect is immediate. You lean in, rapt. Music accompanies these stories, but subtly. The aulos drifts in airy tones, suggesting suspense or wonder, while the kithara adds gentle highlights, almost like a whispered commentary. Oddly, the music mirrors the narrative, cueing tension, resolution, or playful irony. You probably wouldn't survive without noticing how every pluck and breath underscores the story, but it heightens the immersive effect. Food, too, plays a quiet role. Honeyed cakes, small fruits, and olives are passed among listeners, sometimes as offerings, sometimes as playful tokens. Oddly, the act of sharing sustenance reinforces the intimacy of the moment, linking physical pleasure with narrative intrigue. Scholars still argue whether this was ritualistic or incidental, but it certainly creates connection. Guests adopt subtle gestures to enhance storytelling. A deliberate pause, a flicker of the candlelight over a thoughtful expression, or a whispered aside to a neighbor. Oddly, these nonverbal cues carry as much meaning as the words themselves, adding layers of suspense and social nuance. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally mimicking a gasp, but it pulls you deeper into the unfolding drama. Flirtation lingers in soft, playful forms. A well-timed glance, a teasing smile, or a barely perceptible touch punctuates moments of tension or humor. Oddly, the Greeks seem to understand that subtle intimacy amplifies narrative engagement, making stories feel alive and personally significant. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally blushing, but observing the dance of attention is mesmerizing. Micro-games continue to weave through the storytelling. Guests challenge each other to reinterpret a tale, guess a hidden moral, or improvise an alternate ending with wit and charm. Oddly, these contests transform passive listening into active participation, creating a layered tapestry of engagement. Scholars still debate whether improvisation was standard, but tonight it feels vital. Even minor accidents enhance the experience. A dropped cup, a spilled olive, or a misremembered line becomes fodder for playful storytelling, improvisation, or gentle mockery. Oddly, imperfection is celebrated as a tool for engagement rather than a failure. You probably wouldn't survive without occasionally stifling laughter, but it strengthens bonds and enriches the evening. You notice subtle hierarchies emerge again. Some guests command attention through story mastery, others through clever improvisation, and still others through charm and timing. Oddly, the Greeks valued audacity and creativity as much as technical skill, reminding you that social play rewards courage, humor, and intelligence. Scholars still argue whether hierarchy was explicit, but its presence is undeniable. Storytelling blends seamlessly with sensory indulgence. The scent of honey, the warmth of wine, the flicker of candlelight, all enhance tension, humor, or intrigue. Oddly, the Greeks seem to have understood the subtle interplay between narrative and environment, creating a fully immersive experience. You probably wouldn't survive without pausing to absorb all the stimuli, but it deepens your connection to the moment. Games of perception and memory occasionally return. A guest might hide a small token in a plate or use gestures to create a puzzle within the story. Oddly, this layering of narrative, physical action, and sensory cues creates a sophisticated interplay that keeps everyone alert and entertained. Scholars still debate whether these minigames were essential, but tonight, they feel indispensable. By the end of this segment, the room has shifted into a hushed, almost reverent state. Candles flicker low, music softens, and stories linger in the air like fragrant smoke. Scholars may debate the function of ritual and myth in symposia, but you intuitively understand. These stories weave connection, amusement, and subtle reflection. You lean back, savoring the lingering warmth, subtle scents, and the gentle hum of shared presence. You probably wouldn't survive fully alert, but it's a soft, satisfying immersion, a blend of humor, suspense, intimacy, and the delight of human ingenuity. The candles gutter lower, shadows stretching lazily across the room, as the evening drifts into gentle reflection and winding down rituals. You probably won't survive the quiet intimacy of this final phase without a lingering sigh, but here on your cushion, you are perfectly placed to absorb the fading warmth. Music softens almost to a whisper. The kithara plucks slow, meditative chords while the aulos breathes a faint, airy melody, more suggestion than statement. Oddly, the instruments seem to coax reflection rather than attention, guiding the group toward a shared sense of calm. Scholars still argue whether music at this stage was intended to soothe or subtly prolong engagement, but you feel the effect immediately. Guests recline further into cushions, wine cups at half-mast, letting conversation shift from playful games and debates to gentle reminiscence. Stories from earlier performances, witty exchanges, and clever improvisations resurface, now retold in a soft, nostalgic tone. Oddly, memory itself becomes entertainment, layering amusement, warmth, and reflection. You probably wouldn't survive without smiling at a recalled joke, but it adds to the richness of the night. Food is now minimal, small bites shared slowly. Honeyed nuts, figs, and crumbs from earlier indulgence are passed hand to hand with lingering gestures, punctuating conversation. Oddly, even simple acts of sharing sustain intimacy, reinforcing bonds without overt performance. Scholars still debate the ritual significance, but you feel its subtle magic. Flirtation has softened into gentle touches, shared glances, or teasing whispers that linger just long enough to draw a smile. Oddly, the seduction is now more about presence than performance, charm intertwined with comfort and trust. You probably wouldn't survive without noticing the flutter in your chest, but observing is quietly satisfying. A guest offers a final micro game, recalling a favorite line from the evening's stories or composing a short verse on the spot. Laughter punctuates subtle applause, reinforcing a shared sense of closure. Oddly, even these last small contests underscore human ingenuity, wit, and social connection. Scholars still debate their purpose, but tonight, they feel perfectly fitting. Even minor mishaps now contribute to the night's charm. A tipped wine cup, a misquoted line, or a gentle stumble draws laughter, teasing, and camaraderie. Oddly, imperfection punctuates intimacy, reminding everyone that shared joy thrives on human flaws. You probably wouldn't survive without a soft chuckle, but it enriches the final moments. The room hums with a gentle energy, a shared warmth that is neither loud nor demanding. Candlelight flickers, shadows deepen, and the aroma of wine, honey, and wax melds into a comforting backdrop. Oddly, the Greeks seem to have understood that subtle sensory layering prolongs emotional resonance without fatigue. You probably wouldn't survive fully alert, but it's a gentle, enveloping satisfaction. Music, food, conversation, and tactile connection blend seamlessly, creating a cocoon of comfort. You notice how the evening has evolved. From raucous energy, games, and flirtation to reflection, gentle connection, and slow satisfaction. Scholars may argue about structure, but you feel the intentionality in every gesture, every note, every shared smile. Guests begin to withdraw gradually. Some recline fully, letting their heads rest against cushions. Others murmur quiet farewells or offer gentle pats on the back. Oddly, the departure is neither abrupt nor sad. It feels like a natural extension of the night's rhythm. You probably wouldn't survive the subtle poignancy without a twinge of warmth, but the sense of closure is comforting. You lean back, eyes half closed, absorbing the lingering glow, the soft murmur of shared presence, and the faint resonance of music. Oddly, the night leaves you feeling both alert and relaxed, full of laughter, insight, and human ingenuity. Scholars may debate the ultimate function of symposia, but you intuitively grasp their magic: connection, charm, daring, humor, and reflection woven into a seamless, living experience. As the room settles into stillness, you notice the final gift: a collective breath of satisfaction, laughter fading into gentle hums, warmth lingering in the air. You probably wouldn't survive the enchantment fully awake, but you feel wrapped in memory, comfort, and quiet awe. The candle flames dance slowly, shadows stretching long across walls and cushions. You feel the gentle ebb of energy, the room humming with the last traces of laughter and conversation. The wine's warmth lingers in your veins, the faint sweetness of honey and nuts still on your tongue. Your body relaxes into the cushions, your senses attuned to the subtle rhythm of breathing, soft movement, and the whisper of fading music. Outside, the night is deep and calm. Perhaps a breeze drifts in, carrying the scent of distant flowers or the faint rustle of leaves. You imagine the world paused, allowing this intimate cocoon of warmth and connection to remain just for you. Oddly, the Greeks seem to understand that quiet reflection is as powerful as boisterous play, a final balm that seals memory and emotion. Soft laughter echoes in your mind from earlier, threads of wit, flirtation, and clever improvisation lingering like gentle ghosts. You notice how stories, games, and shared indulgence have woven themselves into a subtle, comforting tapestry. Each smile, glance, or whispered aside resurfaces as a gentle pulse of warmth, reminding you that connection, humor, and play endure beyond the moment. Your breath slows, your thoughts soften, and the night folds gently around you. You feel a profound mixture of satisfaction and drowsy contentment, a quiet awe at the ingenuity, charm, and playful audacity of human interaction. Oddly, even absent the wine, the music, or the candles, the memory itself is enough to hold you in a soft embrace. You whisper a final sigh of contentment, imagining yourself floating in the gentle currents of shared presence, stories, laughter, and warmth. The room, the night, and the echoes of human ingenuity lull you softly, gently, and inevitably toward rest. Sweet dreams.